Hello and welcome to the latest panel for YA ThrillerCon. This is the panel all about elements of suspense in YA thrillers. This is one of my favourite topics. I'm really delighted to be talking about this. And we've got some amazing authors with us and possibly one more to come. We might be having some little technical issues, we're not quite sure. But so at the moment we've got Chelsea Ichaso, Kat Ellis, Kate Brauning and Laurie Elizabeth Flynn. And I am Madeline Dyer. So we might also be joined by Goldy Moldavsky later on. So we'll just keep an eye out for her arriving. So let's start with introductions then. So Chelsea, would you like to go first with introducing yourself to our viewers?
Sure. Hi, I'm Chelsea Ichaso, and I write YA thrillers. This is my debut, Little Creeping Things. And that came out last year. I have 2 upcoming thrillers. One will be out in April of 2022, and then one later in the year. And I should be having a title and cover announcement for the second one any day now. So that's exciting.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to your next books because I loved your first one. So as soon as they're available, I'm just going to be ordering them straight away. So Kat, I'm actually reading your book at the moment and I'm halfway through and I can't wait to just have another moment to myself just to read a bit more. So would you like to introduce yourself to viewers and tell them a bit about your book?
I would love to. Very nice to hear that you're reading it. Thank you very much. Hi everyone, I'm Kat Ellis and I am the author of a few thriller books, including Harrow Lake, which came out last year, and my new book, which is coming out in just a few weeks' time, is called Burden Falls and Wicked Little Deeds, depending on whether you're in the US or the UK. So that comes out next month and is a very spooky horror thriller type book.
Well, now I just can't wait to read that one either. I feel with all the panels that are running, I'm just getting a massive list of books that I need to buy immediately as soon as they're available. So this is great. Kate, would you like to go next with introductions?
I would love to. I'm Kate Brauning, and I write young adult thrillers kind of all across the map. I call them thrillers with a twist of whatever weird thing pops in my head. My debut is How We Fall Up Here. That's a young adult romantic suspense. And then my second is The Ballad of Dinah Caldwell, which comes out November 2nd, and it's a near future revenge thriller.
That sounds great. I love revenge thrillers. That's just my thing. As soon as I hear anything, if it's got a revenge thriller, big part of the plot, then it's just so exciting. So another book I need to read. And finally, Laurie, would you like to go next with introducing yourself and your books to viewers?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Laurie Elizabeth Flynn. I write young adult and adult suspense. This is my latest young adult, All Eyes on Her, which came out last summer. I think what I would categorize my type of thriller as purely psychological. I don't do a lot of blood and gore. It's all sort of psychological warfare, mind games. My books all have sort of a examination of societal double standards and really deal with a lot of issues that girls and women face. So that's layered into all my books. And so that social commentary is something that you can always expect, whether I'm writing YA or adult.
Great, because I am a massive fan of your books as well, Laurie. I'm getting a bit of a theme here with everyone. I just love all of your books. So we've just been joined by Goldy. So welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself to viewers? We're just doing introductions at the moment, and you've arrived with perfect timing. So if you'd like to tell viewers who you are and a bit about your latest book.
Hi, sorry I was late. There were connection troubles, as I'm sure we are all familiar with at this point. I'm Goldy Moldavsky. I wrote The Last Girl, as it is known in the UK, also known as the Mary Shelley Club in the US. A suspensey thriller mystery about Rachel, a girl who goes to a school in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. She joins a horror-obsessed club called the Mary Shelley Club. They do scary pranks on people, and the stakes are high. The body count is mid-level, I guess. And yeah, wackiness ensues. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. And I can't wait to read your book either. I was just saying, like, every panel that I've been moderating so far, I've just been creating a list of titles of these books that I absolutely have to read next because they all sound amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a live broadcast. So if you're watching live, you can use the Q&A facility on the YouTube page or on the Facebook page. And I can see that we have actually got some questions already. So Goldy and Kat, you've both said that your books have different titles in the US and the UK. So we've got a question saying, how do you feel about a complete title change for other markets? So yeah, I'll just throw this out for either of you two if you'd like to answer.
Sounds good, yeah. Would you like to go first, Goldy?
Okay, sure. It's kind of a complicated question because on one level, I like having a bunch of different versions of my stories out there, just as like a fun Easter egg if the reader is really into that. Like I know when I was a teen, like I was a huge fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I know they had a soundtrack for the UK and a soundtrack for the US, and I had to have my hands on both. So like that sort of thing as a fangirl like really riles me up. But on the other hand, just promoting it is kind of difficult to have to be on social and be like, okay, you know it in one place is this, and then the other place is that, and wherever you're from, it's probably not available, and it'll probably have a totally different title. I know that for the Polish version, we just decided on the title, which is going to be Scream! ! Not to be confused with Scream, the great movie franchise. But yeah, it's fun to have a bunch of different versions of stuff. That's my opinion on it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. But I think one of the positives to having two different titles and covers, I mean, I don't think you could get two more different titles or covers than these two. I mean, there's not even like a color in common. So that does make things like, you know, getting merch interesting. But I think it also gives readers that double opportunity to be grabbed by it. You know, if they walk into a bookshop or see it online somewhere, maybe one cover calls out to them more than the other one. One title is, you know, more up their street than the other. So yeah, I think it has that as a positive. I'm going to see it as a positive anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And it also makes you think about how different covers are like completely different designs aimed at different markets as well, and how it's very much like the designer's interpretation of your book as well. So I always like looking at, especially like classic novels, and looking at all the different covers and the different designs that people have come up with across like the years. So yeah, it's really fascinating. But yeah, as this is a panel all about the elements of suspense in YA thrillers, I feel that I should ask a question about suspense. So my first one is, what is your favorite way to create suspense? And Laurie, let's come to you first for this.
Sure. I think for me, it's sort of a chaotic process, I guess, as you and I have discussed before. I think we're both pantsers with our books, so we don't plot, so we have that in common. But so for me, my subconscious sort of builds a lot of the suspenseful moments without me even realizing it when I'm writing my first draft, which I find really fun and sort of just really unpredictable. I will often write something without knowing why at the time, but just kind of go with it and trust the process, which is easier said than done sometimes. But often when I'm done the first draft or when I'm revising, I realize why I put something in, and I realize it's a clue. And from there, I will kind of create like a revision plan or an outline for myself to try to make sense of the messy first draft. And that's usually where I kind of try to lay the clues and figure out what I really want to lean into to create those suspenseful moments, and figure out what those moments are going to be and what kind of reveals and twists they are leading up to, just to make sure that there's no dropped plot threads or, you know, lines of questioning that go nowhere, which are happen in all my drafts. But I generally, I don't know, I find it fascinating as a thriller writer that your subconscious can be up to so much without you realizing it for the longest time. And I think that's why one of the reasons I like writing thrillers so much is I surprise myself as I'm writing. And then if I'm taken aback, I figure a reader must also be, hopefully surprised and not see a twist coming as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Because we've talked a lot before, you and I, about how our writing processes are quite similar. So yeah, let's go to Kate next. Do you sort of agree with the process Laurie's been outlining, or does it vary for you with how you create suspense?
I have a couple different strategies I like using. And that's one of the things I love about thrillers and suspense is that there's so many different devices that you can use. One of the things that I really liked doing in The Ballad of Dinah Caldwell was looking at the relationship between tension and stakes. Or suspense and stakes, because to me they're very intertwined, or at least were for this book. And so I had a lot of fun looking at all the different things you can put on the line for a character, starting with physical resources, home, friends, family, food, and then getting into some deeper ones, health and safety, and then finally putting on the line for the character pieces of their identity, the ability to be a good sister, the concept of home, pieces of their psychological security, and then finally even getting down to putting some of their ethics on the line and seeing where that's going to hold up or break down for them. And really that allows you to get into some pretty deep character change, I think, which is maybe some of your greatest stakes of all. So for me, that stakes question, really interesting and deep and urgent stakes, creates just tons of tension and suspense.
Yeah, definitely. And especially when it's linking into characterization, like you say, and these big character reveals, because if the reader knows something about one character that other characters don't know, that's going to create suspense automatically. And I really like sort of delving into characterization and using that, as you were saying. So Goldy, do you have any other favorite ways to create suspense?
Yeah, just piggybacking on what you were saying about what the characters know. I think withholding information and revealing it at different points in the book is a good way to build up that tension. I always think back about the cardinal rule that Hitchcock always used, which is the bomb underneath the table. Are you guys familiar with it? Where it's you can put a bomb under the table and not show it to the audience, and then the bomb goes off, and that's a huge, obviously, plot twist and shock. But if you show the audience the bomb under the table the whole time while they're having their dinner, that's suspense, because you're waiting for that moment ticking down for the bomb to go off. So really it's about giving the reader kind of tidbits and where you put it throughout the story, planting those seeds to be discovered at certain points. Every time there's a new piece of information discovered, that's the plot thickening, basically, until you've got a really juicy, delicious pot boiling over towards the ending, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I love how if you've got the readers knowing something and other characters knowing something, but the one crucial character who needs to know it doesn't, that is just really suspenseful moment. And yeah, you can build on that throughout pretty much a whole manuscript, sort of building extra layers around it. So, and I just find it really fun to do that as well. So Kat, what about you?
Well, adding to everything that I completely agree with that all of the people here have said already, I think, if you're going to then up the stakes, increase the suspense, I mean, you can't really fail if you want to just kill somebody. That's always a good go-to. If you want to kill somebody close to the main character, as soon as a death happens that's near to them, there's that massive element of threat. Should that have been me? Was that meant to be me? And am I next? You can use all sorts of devices like that, like taking away the exits, make them feel trapped. All of these devices are things that I've used and used in different ways in my books. So yeah, just keep building and building and seeding the hints, as Goldy was saying, and yeah, just keep them on the hook.
Yeah, definitely. And Chelsea, is there anything else that you would like to add, or have we covered quite a few different ways to create suspense?
Yeah, I think everybody pretty much hit on like what I would say are the most central things, your character and your stakes. I think like in a traditional sense, a suspense novel might differ from like a mystery thriller in that you can know who the villain is at the very beginning, and that creates your suspense. And so I think when you're writing a mystery thriller and you have to kind of hold your cards a little bit closer as a writer, you can use red herrings as a way of creating suspense to get like you through the book. Other devices would be like adding a ticking clock, so that you know things have to happen by a certain point in time. Atmosphere can be another device just for amping up the suspense, the mood, and shown through maybe a darker setting or something like that. So just a few other ways that I try to do that.
Great. Yeah, I love what you said about the ticking clock, because like as soon as you've got a countdown running, there's like this really strong sense of urgency as well, and like that combined with like fast pacing, that can really create like extra suspense. So yeah, I'm just a massive fan of books that have countdowns. So yeah, so let's next talk about some books that you have read that you feel creates suspense particularly well, and then we can talk a bit about why. So I'll just throw this one out there because I feel a bit weird just picking on people all the time. So yeah, if one of you has like a favorite book that creates suspense particularly well, if you'd like to talk a bit about it and why that is. Yeah, okay then. Yeah, Kat?
Shall I go? Okay. There are two books actually that do something quite similar that are two of my favorites. One of them is the recent book, One of Us is Lying. I think that creates suspense brilliantly and just keeps you, the beats there are just keeping you on the hook, turning the pages. But there's also an older book that did a very similar thing to that, called What Happened to Cass McBride, and it was by an author called Gail Giles. Are you familiar with that one? Anybody here? In case you're not, it was a book. It begins with a girl, Cass McBride, who sort of awakes, and she's in a coffin underground. She's been buried alive, and there's just like an air pipe leading up to the surface. And she realizes that there's somebody on the other end of this air pipe, and she has to kind of figure out why they've buried her alive. What are the events that led up to her being buried, and how is she going to talk her way out of this situation? So you have that kind of situation where she's trying to figure things out, but you have the present, obviously, tense. Am I going to die buried alive here? But then also looking back at the events that led up to it, and it sort of unravels the mystery that way. And I think it is kind of similar to how that works in One of Us is Lying, that, you have these group of characters in detention, and, one of them dies, this, right from the start. And then you have to kind of figure out, how these characters relate to one another and who's responsible for the death. So you have that sort of looking back from the moment of tension that it begins with.
Yeah, that sounds really great. And I haven't read that older one, so I need to look that up after this panel. So yeah, another book to go on my list. Yeah, Kate, you look like you were going to say something as well for a book to recommend.
Yeah, I am all ready for this. I have two, actually. The first is Damsel by Elena K. Arnold, which I wholeheartedly recommend. In fact, both of these are, my other rec is Sawkill Girls by Claire Legrand. And both of these are very gutsy feminist thrillers, which I just love. But I really love Damsel because it starts out making this promise to the reader that this is not a fairy tale. And it looks so much like a fairy tale. And then the story sets out to just take the reality that you start with and slowly puncture it and show some gaps. And the reader is just forced to ask over and over, how is this not a fairy tale? Why is this not a fairy tale? And then almost in that kind of Truman Show kind of way, you start seeing some of the gaps, and this just creeping horror starts settling in, where you start seeing how it's not a fairy tale, and the reality that you start out with just starts shifting under your feet. And I love the way she creates that kind of suspense, especially through a feminist lens, where it really does have something to say about kind of the fairy tale archetypes we see ourselves in, and we kind of view relationships through. And Sawkill Girls treads on that ground a little bit too, in a wholly unique way. It does a similar thing with that shifting reality, but I just love the way she used setting to create her suspense, putting this story about these disappearing girls out on this rock with all these beautiful, unrealistic, very rich people, but out in a setting where nature just has so much control. And so it's this very like discordant forces kind of a setting where there aren't the resources of a mainland. You're more at the mercy of the weather. The setting is a little bit more forgotten and isolated. So you don't have the kinds of emergency services that you would have. You don't have the kinds of communication devices that you might have somewhere else. And she makes great use of the setting in that way to build suspense, since you don't have some of the tools that you would otherwise.
Yeah, that's a really good point about how setting can be used like that. And I love Sawkill Girls. I listened to the audio of it a few months ago, and like it just blew me away. It's so good. So, yeah, Laurie, would you like to go next? If there's a book that you would like to recommend for one that creates suspense well.
I can go, if that's cool, if Laurie's out. Yeah?
Sorry, I
Hello?
was muted.
Oh, okay.
Hi. Can you guys hear me now? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry. My mic was muted. I'm sorry. Okay, if everyone can hear me now, sorry about that. The book that I was going to mention was just released a couple weeks ago, That Weekend by Kara Thomas. And Kara Thomas is like such a brilliant author at suspense, and I buy all of her books and I'm obsessed with them all. But That Weekend, I think, is her twistiest one yet. And she really builds suspense by kind of alternating between the present and the past. The narrator was in the Catskills in a cabin with a couple of her friends, and they did that instead of going to prom. And something happened, and her two friends are missing, and she doesn't remember anything that happened. So right away, there's a formula for perfect suspense, like just so. And then there's the present day where there's this investigation into what happened, and people are searching for her two friends, and she sort of takes it upon herself to try to remember and try to find out what happened. So I loved the alternating timeline going back and forth between the present and this sort of investigation and trying to figure out what happened, and the weekend itself and the hours leading up to the disappearance of her two friends. So I highly recommend it. I was totally like sucked in right away, and it's totally my kind of book, and the suspense was high, and it just for me kept getting even higher. So it was unputdownable.
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of her books anyway. So like any book that she releases, just like an instant buy, like have to read it. Yeah, Goldy, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'm basically just going to say the same thing that Laurie and Kat were talking about. And now I'm realizing like what a huge part of suspense, past and present and future, are when we're telling our stories. Because what I was going to say is, like, when you give your reader some information of what happened in the past, that's how I started the Mary Shelley Club, or The Last Girl. Two titles again. Yeah, I start with a prologue of a scene that happens in the main character's past a year ago. And I feel like a lot of particularly scary movies happen that way too. Like I'm thinking of, what's it called? When a Stranger Calls. I think like the first 10 minutes of that movie is basically just a giant prologue. And it's, I think, the best part of the movie. And then it jumps like 10 years later. But yeah, I realize a lot of authors do that. I'm thinking of like Stephen King when I read Pet Sematary, and that moment where the main character's little boy dies, Gage dies. I realized, as I knew what happened because I'd seen that movie when I was young, and then as an adult I read the book, and I realized like that's an important part of the story, but he tells you that that's going to happen, you know, like chapters before it actually does. And I realized as I was reading, like, wow, like he like it just in a few sentences as he's putting the child to bed in his crib, Stephen King rips out your heart and tells you that this poor baby's going to die soon. And that grips you as a reader. It makes you want to keep turning the pages and be like, why? What happened? So I think, and you can use that, I think, in any genre. I'm thinking of John Irving, who's one of my favorite authors who writes literary fiction. He often tells you how these main characters are going to die in the future. And it's just like, maybe it has nothing to do with that specific plot, but it really hooks you in as a reader. So I think revealing parts of the character's past or future, I think, is a really good plot device for, you know, stirring the tension in there.
Yeah, definitely, because it's all about when you choose to reveal information, and you can really play around with that. And that's one of the things I really love about drafting, because like I don't plan my books at all. I just go into a first draft not knowing anything. But then when I'm working on the second draft, I'm then choosing being really deliberate about where I'm revealing certain things. And I do often play around with it to see where it would work best, like if I'm going to reveal it earlier on, or if I'm going to wait till halfway through or a bit later. So yeah, because it is such a powerful technique to create suspense. And Chelsea, let's come to you. So have you got a particular book that you think creates suspense really well that you'd like to talk about?
Oh, these are all such great ones. I love Kara Thomas. Stephen King. I was going to say Misery by Stephen King because I just love the idea of somebody who is supposed to be a good Samaritan and, you know, nobody else knows other than the person that's trapped. But the same kind of idea where someone, the villain or antagonist, is not who everyone else thinks that they are. Books like The Bad Seed or Baby Teeth, where it's like a child and a child is supposed to be innocent and like nobody else believes. And so only the main character is put in peril time and time again. I love that. For me, that is like that's suspense. So.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, Chelsea, let's stick with you for this next question then. Because we've talked a lot about these books that we really like that create suspense well. When you're creating suspense in your own story, or you're like sort of like really looking at the pacing, is there a particular structure that you use?
I don't use a particular structure. I outline, but I feel like I kind of have just beats sort of ingrained in my head somehow. And that I think Laurie kind of mentioned that it's not that I don't plot. That fascinates me that you two don't plot thrillers, just because there's so many twists and turns. I do plot. I just don't really have a set structure that I'm going off of. And when I'm outlining, I'm trying to get various plot points, but it's not like in a traditional sense of like the, you know, if that makes any sense. I'm not a pantser, but I don't have a structure that I use.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Laurie, I know that you have a very similar writing process that I do. So do you sort of like have a structure in mind when you're sort of like pantsing and just try and sort of like fit it in at that point, or do you come back to edit it much later, paying more attention to structure?
Yeah, I wish I had a structure because it might make my life easier. But I'm like full on chaos when I draft. So I'm usually not thinking about anything. And that's sort of my goal going into it, is like not to overthink it. And just to sort of let out all the messy thoughts from my head, because sometimes it takes like 30K into a book before I realize, oh, this is what it's about. Okay, cool. Generally what I try to do before I start drafting is write like a little, basically like a back copy blurb. I try to do that just to condense my my hook into like a little paragraph, because the thing about pantsing I find is that you can easily write yourself into corners, and then that temptation to just give up because it's gotten too messy kind of comes into play, at least for me. And then that's when the new ideas start to look awfully tempting. So what I try to do is I do try to have that little back copy blurb written down, and I go back to that when I sort of feel lost, and I'm like, okay, this is the hook that I planned. And often that changes because, again, sometimes it takes drafting that book to kind of get to the heart of what it's about. So I'm kind of just very free and loose with my first drafts. And then when I do go back to the draft after, I generally print it out in this big, gigantic bound manuscript mess, and then I mark it up with markers and hard copy and just make a gigantic mess out of it even more. And then I'll figure out sort of where things need to happen and what needs to happen. But I don't have a process per se for that either. It's just sort of feeling out where I think things need to go and following my instincts. When I wrote my adult debut, it was a lot of piecing together the two timelines because I wrote them separately. So I printed out the book and I was sort of splicing it together, the physical bound manuscript of the book, just kind of trying to shove the pages together where I thought they fit, and then going over it and figuring out what made sense in the present to reveal something from the past, and when the past was going to bring up something for these characters in the present. And that sort of taught me a lot about tension and a well-timed reveal. So I think having that physical copy of a book in front of me to mark up and to put pages in different orders is a big part of my process. So yeah, my process is very, very messy and haphazard, but it somehow works.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because we all have really individual processes and there's no like wrong or right way to go about this. So I just love hearing about different authors' processes and like comparing it and contrasting. It's always so interesting. And yeah, I'm just really intrigued. So Kat, let's come to you now then. So what's your writing process like? Do you follow a particular structure?
I think I am the complete opposite of you and Laurie in that I tend to overplot, if anything. It's just as messy somehow, but I find that, for example, with Harrow Lake, the first draft of that book, in the story of Harrow Lake, there is a film that is referred to quite often, the film called Nightjar, which was filmed in the town of Harrow Lake. And the first draft I ever wrote of this book that I gave that title to was just the plot of that film, which became just like a few paragraphs of backstory by the time I'd actually refined it and figured out what the story was supposed to be. But I know that backstory so well. I've got that draft sitting in a drawer somewhere. But I decided when I was writing the first draft of my new book, let's call it Wicked Little Deeds so I don't have to give you both titles every time I talk about it. So yeah, when I was doing the first draft of Wicked Little Deeds, I had decided that, as usual, I was going to, write out my pages and pages of backstory, have an outline with all the, the beats of the story that it was going to fit neatly into, and I was going to write this first draft that would be pretty good, I thought, not require too much revision. But of course, that just went out of the window because I spent so much time building up this backstory that when I'd written the first draft, I was like, no, actually, I've neglected the plot and all of the suspenseful moments that need to be in there. So I think when I'm writing a book, my strength tends to come in the revision process, because that's when I look at it more critically and I'm not thinking about, writing pretty sentences or gory sentences, as the case quite often is. Unlike Laurie, my books do tend to be quite gory. So yeah, that's where my strength lies, I think, as a writer. And it's something that I think has gotten better with each book. I mean, this is my 5th one that's coming out next month. So I like to think I'm good at the revision process, terrible at first drafts, despite how much effort I put into plotting them.
Yeah, my first drafts are terrible too. They're just so messy. But yeah, but I find it really freeing being able to write a really messy first draft, because then I don't put any pressure on myself and I can just write exactly what I want to, and I don't really care like what's going in it, because I know no one's going to see it, because it's not until about the 5th or 6th draft that like my agent will even see it, and she's usually sort of the first person who does. So yeah, I just love writing really messy first drafts. It's just so fun, even though nothing makes sense and I don't know what the story is and my characters are changing all the time throughout it because it's not consistent at all, but it is just really fun. So yeah, Kate, let's come to you.
All right, yeah. So I just for solid story beats, I really like using Michael Haig's 6-stage story outline. I find it's really cinematic. It's really common sense and flexible, and it also does a great job of allowing you to braid together the internal conflict and the external conflict. So just for like a story skeleton, that's usually where I start. But for thrillers specifically, especially if I'm looking at something that I want to have a lot of tension and suspense, I really liked what you said earlier, Chelsea, about the information reveal and how that is so key to building suspense and tension. And to me, that information has a lot to do with like a driving question. You know, what are you wanting the reader to ask? So for thrillers, I like to start with a really strong and interesting major dramatic question. So in my new book, The Ballad of Dinah Caldwell, that is, will this homeless girl who's lost everything be able to kill, you know, the local rich rancher who has everything? And so along those story beats, I'd like to hold up yes, maybe, and no all through the story beats and make the reader constantly ask, you know, will she be able to? Yes. Oh, maybe not. And finally, like usually right before the end, there's like this huge reversal into no, she won't be able to do it. And then I can spend the whole third act looking at should she, and turn the question on its head and make the reader like question even the question itself. And some of those reversals along the way, just the way you can play with that structure of the major dramatic question, I find there's so much opportunity there for really urgent like tension building.
Wow, I love that, and especially making the reader question the question. Like that is just so good. I'm gonna have to go back through watching this later with a notebook just to like take notes for all of this because it's like such valuable information. Yeah, so Goldy, let's come to you now. Yeah, would you like to answer the same question?
Speaking of valuable information, I have none for this question. My writing is like such a mess. It's so different with every book. It largely depends on like what craft book I'm reading at the moment. Like I often pick up a new writing craft book for every book and like find like new interesting ideas in each book and I apply it to the current book I'm working on. So it's always different for every book. I feel like if I was a debut author, I would be answering this a little differently. I think when I started writing, it was more like, okay, what's the big question? What's the inciting incident? What is the rising action? And now it's just like, it's like I just go into it. I usually start with a setting, really, more than character. And then I have a vague idea of how I want it to end. And I feel like, you know, different genres, they all basically have the same structure. Like if you want to write a rom-com, your couple's going to end up together. That's your ending. If you want to write a whodunit, you're going to find out who it is at the end, you know. So it depends on the book you're going with. And like for this one, I knew, okay, it would be a whodunit and we're going to find out who it is. I started writing it not knowing who done it. But like Laurie said, if you can surprise yourself while you're doing it, then you can, you know, rest assured that the reader might be surprised too. So that's how I like to go into it. Just knowing a little bit ahead as I'm writing, like just knowing the next few chapters ahead and working towards those next few chapters until I reach the end. But yeah, usually there's like a very little skeleton that I tend to follow for every book, which is just like, you know, the inciting incident, and then towards the end there's going to be a battle, well, you know, like a metaphorical battle, conflict, and like your character is going to be at their lowest point just before they end up victorious, you know, just your general stuff, basically. Read craft books is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's such a good point you made as well about how the type of story that you're telling is going to affect the way that you create suspense? Because there's different like conventions within the different genres. So yeah, that's a really important point. Yeah, we've had a few questions come in from viewers. I think we've got 4 questions. So I will read out one of a question at a time, and then you can just sort of jump in to answer it if it speaks to you. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it, rather than me sort of like picking one of you and putting you on the spot. So we'll start with this one. So have you ever added in an extra red herring after you've almost finished?
Yes, I'll start. Absolutely. I think sometimes it's not until the very end of my thrillers, at least, that I realize that they could use 1 or 2 more. So yeah, my simple answer would be yes, I have.
Great. And if anyone else would
I'm
like
the same
to
way.
Mhm.
I've definitely like.
Yeah, go ahead, Laurie.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say I do the same. Like since a lot of my writing happens in revision, like I do find that I'll go back in and add things or try to add clues or red herrings. So it's always an evolving process. The first draft is never the final draft. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think red herrings usually tend to come in like once you're done or towards the end, because like until then I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea who done it, and it's only when I know the answers to everything that I could start tricking people and like inserting little red herrings and clues that go nowhere. Basically, that's the fun part.
Great. Yeah. So we can move on to the next question now from viewers as well. So what would you say are the must-have tropes of YA thriller, or at least your favorite YA thriller tropes? So yeah, I'll just put this one out there again. So if you'd like to answer, please do.
I like a romance. I don't care that that's why people think they're like the YA thrillers are corny. I don't care. I want there to be kissing when you're looking for a murderer. That's the point of a YA thriller. I love it.
Yeah.
I love an unreliable narrator. That's I just love being like completely blindsided by somebody I think I know in a book. So that's always one that I love.
Yeah, I love including romance in thrillers too. In fact, actually, don't quote me on this. I'm probably going to misquote her terribly because it was years ago, but I got to hear Stephanie Perkins talk about There's Someone Inside Your House a while ago, and her flip to writing some horror, and how she thought romance and horror were basically 2 different sides of the same coin, and how it felt like a very natural branding decision to her because of that relationship there. And I actually really love that idea, and find myself including romance in all of my books because I do think it's such a uniquely vulnerable and connective portion of life. And that if you're putting everything up for stakes and everything up for urgency, why not put that up too?
One of my favorite tropes, I absolutely love the anonymous sinister note. I love seeing that in a book, and it's been done so many times, but I never get sick of it. Have you ever heard the story about when Arthur Conan Doyle, allegedly, I don't know if this is true, but he wrote a note anonymously and sent it to 5 of his friends, and it said, "We are discovered, flee at once." And one of his friends actually did disappear. Like he didn't have, anything on that person or any of his friends. He just did it as a joke, but one of them allegedly disappeared. So I love when that happens in a book. I mean, the anonymous note, when your main character gets it or somebody in the book gets that threatening letter, I just love it because that's just instant.
Definitely, yeah. And I love that story about Arthur Conan Doyle. I hadn't heard that before, so that's really fun. Yeah, so we can go on to the next question now. So how do you know when you found the true start of the story? Have you ever cut earlier scenes after realizing the story actually starts later on? And again, I'll just throw this out for any of you to answer.
I think that I've actually had to change the opening to all of my stories, possibly, one way or the other. Like, I'm either told that they need to start earlier because it's just too confusing, like starting, in meter rest or whatever. And then some of them I've had to start a little bit later. So I never seem to get it right the first time, at least.
Yeah, I've had to do that as well quite a few times. I think, like Chelsea, probably every single time I've started it, but always with the idea in my head that I'm going to have to cut to a certain point in revisions anyway. But I think if where you start your story feels important, but it's not the starting point, like we were talking about before, you can jump backwards and forwards in time anyway. If that is important information to reveal as backstory, you can do it later. If it's not the right starting point, it doesn't really matter. You can always use it later.
I don't want to misquote this person. I think it was Kurt Vonnegut that said you're supposed to start your story as close to the end as possible. And that's always the rule I try to follow. Yeah, we're as close as you can get to the ending where it feels like it could still be a natural beginning. Just cut anything that isn't necessary, basically.
Yeah, I struggled with the opening for The Ballad of Dinah Caldwell a bit because the inciting incident is a major death, and trying to get reader investment, get it the balance right on that, where you care about the character, but you're also not so far into the story that they're waiting for the story to really kick off too long, was tough getting the balance right on that. And also, you don't always want to shock people with a major death in chapter 1 if they're not quite prepared for that yet. And then also it's a big world with a lot of characters. And since her main journey is like losing everything, getting all that on stage to be lost was tough. And so I think I had to rewrite that beginning 4 or 5 times to really get everything on stage, set up, in all the emotional involvement that we need, but all have it happen quickly enough that you're not sitting around yawning. That was quite difficult.
My stories, I really love a prologue, but it has to be the right prologue for me. So I generally always change the beginning of my book. I'll go in with something, and by the end or the middle, or I'll figure out that it's the wrong information I've given near the start and I need to change it. And because the opening is so important. So I'd say mine probably changes almost every time as well.
Yeah, like I agree with that as well, because like with my books, when I'm writing such a messy first draft, most of it's not even in the right order that it should be. So I've got to decide once I finished my draft which scene I'm going to start with, especially if I'm doing like multiple timelines as well. So yeah, and the next viewer question that we've had is after full first drafts, do you have a self-set wait time / break for it, or do you go straight on to edits? So yeah, I don't know whether to pick one of you. I always feel really mean if I pick one of you, but I'm going to pick one of you. So Kate, let's go with you.
Yeah, I also work as an editor, so this is something that I try to like make myself practice what I preach to my authors, which is to wait at least 1 month for a short book, or 2 if you can, to really have fresh eyes. Unless you're something you need to fix, you can go in and start doing that immediately. But usually a month or 2 I find is a good wait time for me. I'll notice things that I wouldn't have noticed before. I'll have better, fresher ideas on it. I'll be able to step outside my initial emotional investment a little. But there are things I found that help me gain that distance that aren't necessarily time. Reading outside the genre, reading 4 books inside the genre, changing the font, printing it out, just really anything that can help you gain some more objective perspective on the story. And time is just one of those things for me.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so Chelsea, is yours like a similar process?
Yeah, I guess it can be hard to set the book aside because you just want to, you're excited about it when you're excited about it and you kind of want to dive in. I have taken to juggling projects so that it kind of forces me, like I'll give it to some friends to read it and then I kind of don't have it anymore and then I'm working on like the next thing. And so as long as I can constantly be juggling, then it forces me to put some space between it. And then I do think that it's valuable to wait and look at it again with fresh eyes. It's always helped me to see things that I didn't see before. And it's especially helpful if it comes back with notes from a trusted friend or an agent or whoever.
Yeah, definitely. Goldy, would you like to go next with answering this question?
Yeah, the idea of changing fonts is like so fascinating to me. I'm going to have to try that out. Usually I like to go straight back in. As soon as I write the end, the next day I'll go in and start chapter 1 again. Yeah, I like to keep it fresh. I want to stay excited for it. The last time I let something rest, I never opened the draft again. And I just started the book again over without even reading the last draft. And I don't want to do that again. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like I worked so hard on something. I just want to chisel it out until it's perfect. You know, I don't want to have to start all over. So for me, it has to be immediately put it down, pick it back up the next day.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially if you're really like invested in that world that you're writing and you've got all the story and the characters in your head. So yeah, Laurie, what about you? Because I'm wondering whether you dive straight back into editing a draft, especially when we have quite similar writing processes anyway, because that's exactly what I do.
Yeah, I'm very much like Goldy. I think I really want to just, like, the world is fresh in my head. The characters are fresh in my head. I just want to get back in there before I, like, because I don't know, I feel like my memory and my attention span is like awful. So if I put it aside for a couple weeks, I'm gonna forget a lot of it. Like, that sounds really sad, but it's true. So I find that when I first finish a draft, like I have that complete first draft, the first thing I do is have it printed out in hard copy, and then I start sort of attacking it in that format. So I wouldn't really say I take much of a break, because I generally, after I'm done that first draft, as messy as it is, I know what's wrong with it. And I'm really excited to get back in and fix it and make it what I know it can be. And usually as I draft, I keep a separate Word document with like notes to myself about what needs to be fixed. And it's usually a pretty long document by the end, because I've identified so many flaws, but I don't want to lose the momentum in drafting. So I just kind of plow through and keep going, even though I know it's turned into a hot mess. So, and then once I kind of print it out and dive back in, I just like to stay like in touch with that world and those characters before I put it aside and get distracted by something else. So I like to just kind of get in there, fix it, and then send it off to my critique partners and my agent. But I like to have that, you know, the fixing done really quickly. I'm very impatient.
Yeah, that's really similar to me, because like I just have to dive straight back in. Yeah, so Kat, what about you?
I think I'm very impatient as well, because if somebody asked me, you know, should you dive back in, you know, or leave it for a while, then I would say absolutely you should leave it for a while, take a step back. But I never follow my own advice there, so I'm a complete hypocrite where that's concerned. But I also have a similar thing to Laurie, where my memory is so terrible that, you know, it's quite fortunate in a way that when I'm going back in to revise this messy manuscript, I don't remember half of it anyway. So it's not like I'm kind of, you know, polluting this story that's already in my head, because it's fresh again already, because I have the memory of a goldfish. So yeah, I don't take the advice that I dish out there.
I have to agree, Kat and Laurie, sorry, just jumping in here, because like when you're drafting, like once you get to chapter, let's say like 36, and you're like adding a whole new character who didn't appear in like chapters 1 through 35. You just want to get it back into the manuscript to be like, oh, okay, I have to add this person now. And that just keeps happening with every draft. That's what revising is, basically. You just go back in and like Laurie said, I have like a whole document with notes of things that I have to add in the next draft. And it's just, you just got to keep adding until it's done, basically.
I'm so glad that the rest of you guys say that you forget things that you write, because sometimes if I leave something for a month, like I forgot the main character's name in a book once. Like it was so bad. But yeah, thank you guys for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. So we're coming up to the end of the time now for the panel. So if we finish with sort of a double question where we can each answer it quickly. So firstly, if you would like to tell readers where they can find you online and buy your books, and also what is the one piece of advice that you would give to aspiring writers. So Kate, should we come to you first for this?
Sure, yeah. My 2 novels and my short story are all available on my website, www.katebrauning.com. And I'm also all over Twitter and Instagram, just at Kate Brauning. So you can find my stuff there. And I think there's a lot of just really great things I think that young or new writers can hold on to. And I think the thing that was most impacting for me was to really take to heart the fact that if I did it once, I can do it again. You know, if I wrote a really great line, but it doesn't work in the revision anymore, keep the line for myself, but trust that I can do it again. You know, if I came up with a great character or a great setting or a concept or something like that, not to feel like that's the only time you'll be able to do that, to trust the instinct that came from, and to just really love the process of allowing yourself to create those cool things.
Yeah, that's really great advice. Goldy, would you like to go next?
Sure. You guys can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Goldy Writes, Goldy with a Y. And the advice I would give, the thing I think that really took me from just a hobbyist amateur to an actual writer, I think, was writing the full story through to the end. I mean, finishing anything you write is really important, but for me, and take this with a grain of salt because everybody writes differently and you have to do what's right for you. But I used to jump around and write whatever chapter I was most excited about and like forget about the beginning or the middle. And that really never worked out for me. And once I started writing things through, even a messy first draft, that was really liberating to just like, I wasn't excited about writing this chapter, but I had to get it down. I was glad that I got it down just so that I could go back and fix it. So just write something through all the way to the end. Even if you're not into the particular scene at the moment, you can go back and fix it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Chelsea, would you like to go next?
Sure. I am at Chelsea Ichaso on Twitter and Instagram, and my website is chelseaichaso.com. And I think I would say that things got a little easier for me once I found a writing community. I have a couple of close friends and then like a little more broader of a circle. And so whether that's in person or you find people online so you can talk about writing and swap work, and you can find advice from people who have, you know, gone before and things like that. That would be my advice.
Yeah, definitely. A writing community is just really important. And I find it really useful for accountability as well, because it actually makes sure that I finish a draft if I know that I've got to send chapters to a critique partner on a weekly basis. So I find that really helpful. Kat, would you like to share your piece of advice and where viewers can find you?
Sure. You can find out more about me and my books and all my links to my socials and stuff on my website, which is katelliswrites.com. As for advice that I would give to writers who are, you know, maybe struggling with creating suspense, take a step back and go to the books or the films or the TV shows that you find keep you on the edge of your seat, and try and look at what are the elements of those things that are keeping you on the edge of your seat. And I think once you start thinking critically about those elements, you'll find that you're thinking about how you can create that sort of suspense in your own work.
Yeah, that's really great advice. So Laurie, would you like to finish up for us with this?
Yeah, I think, oh, sorry, my social media handles can be found on my website, laurieelizabethflynn.com. I'm mostly on Instagram at Laurie Elizabeth Flynn. I probably spend way too much time on there. I'm trying to stop being so online, but anyway, for advice, I think mine's sort of a combination of what Goldy said and what Kat said. Like, for me, the biggest thing was finishing a first draft, because I remember being a writer starting out, and I was such a perfectionist that I never even got to that point. I would just write a paragraph and immediately tell myself it wasn't good enough, and then I was so discouraged and I wouldn't write for weeks. And it took me so long to finally ever write a first draft of anything. And once I did, it was so liberating. And then I started doing it faster and, sort of taking more risks, because what I just tell myself still is like, first drafts just have to exist. That's all they have to do. So just give yourself permission to be messy, but give yourself permission to write, and write, even if it's not gonna turn into the book that's in your head, just getting it out on paper, because otherwise it won't even exist. It'll just be always in your head. And that's advice I still go back to now when I'm stuck, or when the inner editor perfectionism sort of tries to take over, because I think really all you can do for yourself is give yourself permission to create something that may not amount to what's in your head, and might be uglier than you thought, or might be messy, but just embrace the process, get that first draft done, and then you can fix it later. And what Kat was saying is something I think is so important, is to sort of read books critically, or TV shows or movies or whatever, and identify what works, why you love it so much, or why you don't love it. And you can sort of identify those components, and especially with suspense, and figure out, oh man, why was that twist so compelling? What did I love about this book? Or why did this book fall flat for me? And you can sort of allow those factors to kind of creep into your own work, and you can look at your own work with the same analytical viewpoint. And I think that's a really important skill to have.
Yeah, definitely. You've all given some really wonderful advice, so thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining me as well for YA ThrillerCon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maddie.
Thank you so much.